Hey guys, I hope you are enjoying learning Codeigniter. So in our previous session we learned how to install Codeigniter, and in this session we are going to learn how to configure Codeigniter. So let's start with it. So along with configuring Codeigniter, we'll also be understanding the architecture of Codeigniter. So let's start with the right now we are in the application directory. As I've already told you that we are only going to work on application directory. We are not going to touch the system directory. So we'll open application directory and we'll start with config directory. So let's open it. Here in this config directory, the most important files are autoload, config, constants, database, and routes. So let's open all these files in an editor. I'm using Notepad++, and you might be using Dreamweaver, or you might be using brackets or other PHP editors. So like in whatever editor you are comfortable with, you can open it, and then we'll open all the files that I just mentioned: config, database, constants, then routes. Now let's start checking all these files one by one. So let's start with the autoload.php. The purpose of this file is to load various helpers that will be required. For example, when you might be working with some PHP or maybe some other framework, you use sessions, right? We use URL, we use file helpers. So those things will be required, and in Codeigniter we need to load our session, our URL, any helper that we want. We can define it here. We can also know, you need to know that we can also load any file in our controller. However, like what I used to do is autoload the basic files which are required throughout the application. So if you scroll down in autoload.php file, you'll find libraries. Okay, so by default this library array, it is all autoload is an array, okay, which has various key and values. So by default this has an empty value, and we need to define the features that we want to our Codeigniter application to use. For example, we want to use database, so we'll be defining database within libraries. If we want to use email functionality, we'll be including it here, and if we want to use session, we'll be including it here. So it is very important. Okay, now scroll down and please stop at helper. We have URL helpers and file helpers in Codeigniter, and we want to include these helpers in our application because we'll be using these helpers in order to work on file uploading stuff and in order to work on URL stuff. Okay, so let me show you. If you go to system directory, you'll find helpers directory, and within helpers we have this form helper. So we can also include form helper if you want to use the Codeigniter form helpers, and we can use, we have already included URL helper. So again you need to understand that these are the core helper files of Codeigniter, and we are not going to modify it the files which reside within the system directory. We will be only working in our application directory. So we were in config directory. Okay. By default, this helper array, this autoload array, will have empty value. Okay, and you need to define the helpers that you want to include in your Codeigniter application. Okay, so I have included URL and file, which are also available as a prototype. Okay, as a hint to you what you can include in your autoload file. Okay, now let's scroll down, and we are done with the basic configuration as far as autoloading files, URLs, helpers is concerned. Okay, libraries. Now we'll go to another file, which is config.php. This file also resides inside the config directory. Okay, this one. So in config directory, the first important junction is base_URL. This will basically cover your base URL that you will use in order to run the website. For example, if we talk about google.com, so our base URL becomes google.com. Here we are running our here we are going to run this application on local, so it will be something like http localhost and then the name of the directory. Okay, Codeigniter, and it was 3.1.3, I think, right? That's 3.1.3. okay, and you remember I told you that we can change this directory name to any name we want. Okay, so that's totally your choice. Now if we want index.php to not appear in the URL after our base URL, so we can simply remove it. If we are going to leave it, then this index.php will appear in the browser URL after our directory name. Okay, so I prefer removing it from index_page. Okay, and one thing that you will be noticing is that all these variables are arrays. In our autoload file, we have autoload arrays, okay, with different keys. Okay, and in our config, we have $config array with different keys like base URL, index page. So scroll it further down. You can set any encryption key if you want. When you are uploading things on server, you're uploading files on server, and you want a better security. So from security point of view, you can define your any hexadecimal number, which looks quite complex. Okay, for security. Again, this one. If you want to store your session in a directory, you can define the path of the directory within which you are going to store the session. So this will come later stage. On local, it will work fine even if you don't touch it at all. About the session storage path. But when you will be uploading it on some server, it will start rendering error if you don't give an absolute path. Okay. So we'll be checking it when we'll be uploading our projects on the server. Right now, I'll suggest everyone to configure this on your local machine. So I think that's all that we need to modify in our config file. Okay. There were only two things. One was base URL and the other thing was index_page, removing the value of index_page. Now the third file is database.php, which is also a part of config directory. This file will, as the name gives you hint, this file will have a name of the host name, the username, the password, and the database with which you want your Codeigniter application to connect. Okay. Now let's move to constants.php. Now here also the name itself is enough to understand what it file basically is used for. Okay, so you can see that there are different constants defined. Okay, and here we can also define our own custom constants, like if we want our users to see certain error messages, okay, when they are not able to log in successfully, we can define our constants and the values and the message for that constant. Okay, so we'll again discuss it later on. You just need to remember that we'll be defining our constants or all the constants in this file. Okay, the last and the most important file within our config directory is routes.php, and this file has very important role in Codeigniter because it is helpful in providing a routing to Codeigniter. It is helpful in loading of a controller. Okay, so here if you open this routes.php, by default you'll find that the default controller that is being called is welcome controller. So don't get confused about the controller. I'll explain it. Okay, you just need to remember that right now the first point of calling is welcome, and it is a controller, and I'll explain the concept of controller later on. Okay, so let's move out of our config directory, and we are again into our application directory. Okay, so the other directory that you'll find is controllers, which has a very important role where we define our classes. Okay, by default you'll find welcome controller, which was actually being called in our routes.php file. Okay, I've just shown you this welcome controller. So this is the same controller that is being called from within the controllers directory, but this will be also covered later on. We have helpers file. By default no helpers file are defined in our application helpers directory. Okay, we'll be creating helpers file at later stage. Then we have libraries. Here also by default no libraries classes are defined, and models also it is empty with only index.html file. This directory is also empty, and we'll be defining it at a later stage. We have views directory, and you just need to remember understand now that views are basically HTML files. That is our HTML things. I'll be explaining the models, views, and controllers when I'll be explaining MVC. So this was all about configuring Codeigniter and understanding the architecture and structure of Codeigniter. In our next session we'll start understanding the concept of MVC, okay, which will cover the understanding of models, views, and controllers. So stay tuned. See you in our next session.